Hi there. We are now live. Hi, Katerina Lowry. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, Lowry like low.
Low,
Lowry.
right, okay. I like that. Katerina, you're going to deliver a session today on looking at belonging and focusing around the current challenges of educational recruitment and also bringing in the concepts around neurodiversity. So I'm really looking forward to this session. So, Katerina, just want to start us off with just a little introduction, and then we'll go straight into the into your presentation today.
Sure. Well, hello everybody. Thank you for being here this evening, and thanks to all of those who are going to be watching it online afterwards. My name's Katerina Lowry. I am a neurodivergent former Senko and advisory teacher. I currently live in Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales, but I have worked all over the UK and abroad as well. And I originally started as a modern foreign languages teacher and then sort of meandered into special needs over the years. I currently work as what I suppose you would loosely call an educational consultant, insofar as I do training and culture change work with schools, but I also work with businesses, nurseries, universities and colleges. So like full range of neurodivergent people. And my main mission is to improve inclusion for neurodivergent people.
I love that. Ending with a mission. This is my mission statement right there.
Always.
And also, Katerina, you run the Neurodivergent Teachers Network on Facebook, which I'm actually a member. 1,000 members. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's over 1,000 now. I think we're in 1,200 actually now.
Wowzers.
Like when I first started out as a teacher, I was the only neurodivergent teacher. I knew I was dyslexic. And, you know, that was way back in the 90s when I first started teaching, a long time ago. And I spent many years masking the hell out of it and really not wanting anyone to know about it. And then actually what happened was I was unmasked by the nervous breakdown that I had in 2017. And actually it's probably been one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And since then, I've then discovered all of these other neurodivergent teachers. I mean, Lynn McCann's been in this week, and Francis Akinde, and yourselves, and Simon. It's just been amazing. And then over the last 2 years, I've had this amazing journey where we've gathered these groups of neurodivergent educators. We've got this wonderful support group. Fabulous. It's been even the stuff that was up posted this morning, I'm just like, just heartens me to see people supporting each other like that. So if you're on Facebook and you're a neurodivergent teacher, there I have two requirements. First of all, that you are neurodivergent, and secondly, you are somebody who works in education, and then you'll be very welcome to join. And it's an international group as well. So wherever you are in the globe, you're very welcome to come along.
Yeah. And it's so great because we have to create these empowering spaces for us, don't we? Because they haven't been done. So I think even with this conference, it's a kind of real grassroots because we were like, we have to do something if those that could are not, so that we have to actually set the standard, really. So that's brilliant. So without further ado, should we go into your session, which I'm really looking forward to?
Yes, please. So how do we share on this?
Yes, so I'm going to do this now. I just add to the stage your presentation. Let's hope this all runs really smoothly.
I'm sure it will. It's a little while since I've used what you call it, StreamYard. Yeah. That was so dyslexic of me then, wasn't it? But I have used it before, right? So I just press a button, don't I?
Yeah. Oh, fancy pants.
So today we're going to be talking about belonging, and we're talking about creating belonging and opportunity for neurodivergent colleagues. So I realize that quite a lot of you who come along will be neurodivergent, but where you are in your neurodivergent journey will be variable insofar as there's going to be some people who, like myself and Anna Marie and the others people who are involved in both my network, but also the CIC, who might be completely happy with telling people that they're neurodivergent. There may be other people who are shy neurodivergent because there is, as we'll see from the statistics, quite a lot of stigma still attached to this. And there'll be other people who suspect they may be neurodivergent, but really aren't ready to explore that yet. And then, of course, we've got the allies. And it's very, very important that we have allies because, you know, just statistically speaking, 80% of people are neurotypical. and, you know, the neurodivergent amongst us appreciate the fact that you might be here to find out what you can do to support your neurodivergent colleagues. So I've said a little bit about this next part, which is mainly about me and what I do. And then I'll also talk about what I'm going to talk about this evening. So as I say, I am neurodivergent myself. I have a diagnosis of dyslexia and bipolar conditions, and I also have recognized traits, to medically describe it, of ADHD, dyspraxia, and auditory processing disorder. So there's quite a lot going on in my own little neurodivergent fruit salad there. What I'm going to be referring to today is I recently wrote an article for Pixel about teachers with SENS. This is specifically about teachers who had disabilities. I've also done a little bit of work recently with a research company called Aduro, and they asked me to comment on some data that they got, which they gathered information about teachers who had a variety of different protected characteristics, and the information about teachers who were disabled was particularly interesting. So I'm going to allude to that as well. There aren't really any academic studies that I know of that specifically study neurodivergent teachers, but watch this space. I'm sure we'll find people who want to work on it. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction to neurodiversity. Now, I understand that as I say, people be on different places on their journey. You know, I am like one of the early speakers, so I thought I maybe as well do a little bit of a definition, but then also as well, like how this could affect neurodivergent colleagues and how we can create that sense of belonging and opportunity. So this is what's in my presentation. I'm not going to read that, but I realized that there are some people who like to be anchored in the content. So if you want to, feel free to do a screenshot or take a photograph of that slide. This is what I'm going to be talking about throughout the next few minutes. Okay, so let's start looking at the current situation in schools. Now, this is generally speaking, the recruitment and retention crisis in a slide. So the first thing is there is a 62% skills gap in education overall. That information comes from Oxford Learning College. And the reason right, okay, so when we say there's a skills gap, it means that at any given time, up to 62% of the adverts in education are either finding that they have no respondents, that they have fewer respondents that they would like in order to get a big enough field, or that they are not attracting the right quality of people. So people who can actually fulfill the role. Okay, so that's across the board. Job vacancies and advertisements in secondary school grew by 12% in the last 12 months. Half of secondary school leaders say that schools couldn't interview any candidates for a position as it was too weak a field. Fewer senior leaders and now aspire to become head teachers. That's down 43% from 56% before the pandemic. Half of primary teachers said at least one class in their school is being taught by a temporary or agency member of staff or a non-qualified teacher. This science departments continue to struggle, with 1 in 3 science teachers saying that GCSE science classes are covered by non-specialist teachers. And this is from the Gatsby Foundation 2023. And then 22% of TAs and SEND provision are unfulfilled. And this is from Hayes 2023. And Hayes are the biggest recruitment company in England. Okay, just to give you an idea. So 22% of unfilled positions. And then the number of ND staff is not known, and it is also poorly recorded. And part of the reason for that, as came up in the Aduro and the Pixel data, was because of stigma. So there's a lot of people who aren't really like me and don't feel that they feel confident enough to be able to tell colleagues that they are neurodivergent. So they may form part of the skills gap because a huge number of neurodivergent teachers either leave, take fewer hours, or don't go to the level that they would like to be at. So they may be perfectly capable of being, for example, second in department, head of department, possibly assistant head or head. They probably have the skill set to do that, but they're worried about the burnout, or they're worried that people won't take them even for interview or look at their CV if they declare their neurodivergent condition. So that's the situation as it is so far, but it's not entirely bleak. So the next thing is, if we are to create a sense of belonging in our schools, we don't need to just think about the children. We also need to think about our colleagues. So what actually is belonging? Right. So I'm a massive fan of Brené Brown. You may be familiar with her. She's a sociologist. She did one of the most popular TED Talks ever. And she does research into belonging, shame, and empathy. She's written some really amazing books. But one of the quotes that comes across quite strongly from her is that the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And unfortunately, I still see adverts where we're looking, if you are a good fit for this role, or we're looking for someone to fit in to our mat, to our school, to our ethos, if you fit in with that. Now, that's going to put a tremendous number of people off. So I don't reckon you're going to get very good applicants, but also culture fit isn't actually good for growth. Right. And it's something that businesses shy away from quite a lot these days, especially the successful ones. And it is something that we need to be thinking about in school, because the thing is, when you have culture fit, then you end up with an echo chamber. You end up trying to solve problems in exactly the same way over and over again. We see that in inclusion time after time after time. And you can end up with actually an exacerbation of problems over the years. Because this is the way we've always done it. So we're going to do it exactly the same way. And for an organization to actually thrive, study after study, mainly actually, if you look at Harvard University, a lot of work on this. In order for a study to actually thrive, an organization to actually thrive, what you need is culture add. So you need diversity in all areas, because people with different cultures, people with different experiences, add a new point of view. And when you have a new point of view, you can solve problems better. You can be more efficient. You can think of different ways of doing things. You can create vibrancy within a culture. And one of the amazing things that I think neurodivergent people offer is, because our brains work in a different way, we can see things from a different perspective. Okay. And that is, I think that's a really, really important point. Plus, with all this massive recruitment crisis that's going on, we need to think of radical new ways of doing things within education. And if we've got this huge group of people who are massively underemployed, especially those sorts of people who really have massive hyper focus and really enjoy working within an environment where they get to talk about their special interests for 6 hours a day, why not bring them into teaching? Oh, press the wrong button there. Okay, so as we go through this, I'd like you to think about a particular neurodivergent colleague. Okay, it could be you, right? Now, sometimes, look, I've done a lot of therapy over the years. Self-reflection is really difficult, right? And it can be a little bit painful. So if this is too difficult, don't choose you. Okay. If you are a neurodivergent teacher, you may know somebody else who's a neurodivergent teacher. If you are somebody who works to support a neurodivergent person, then it's about that very good allyship here. Okay. So allyship, part of that is to recognize that somebody has a protected characteristic and try and do whatever you can to support them. And this is a way in which we can do that. So the first thing is knowing your colleague. So what we need to think about is, what do they like doing? So your neurodivergent self or your neurodivergent colleague, what do you like doing? The second thing is, What are you good at, or what are they good at? And the third thing is, how do you help them to feel job satisfaction? Right, because honestly, in teaching, you don't go into it for the money, do you? The pension isn't as great as it used to be, and the school holidays aren't all they're cracked up to be, because frankly, they are toil, their time off in lieu. It's, you know, it's not a holiday. A lot of the time you'll be working all the way through them anyway. So it's just non-contact time, right? So those are none of those are reasons to go into working in education. The reason that you go in is for job satisfaction, and this has been bared out in all of the data that I've seen. So, for example, the Adero statistics talked in all areas of people with protected characteristics, said that people look forward to going to work. Right? Job satisfaction and being excited about going to work is probably the main reason that you go. I've got this really cool idea for a lesson, right? I'm going to do this with year 8. They're going to love it. It's going to blow their minds. It's going to be amazing. You go for the kids, right? You go because you're making a difference. That's why you go to work, right? And your colleague went into this because they love the children, and there'll be things about the job that absolutely makes them light up, right? So try and give them more of that to do. You're going to have to give them things to do. You're going to have to support them to do things that they find difficult. But if you can encourage the satisfaction, build on the strengths, then that could make a massive difference to their day-to-day experience of working in a school. Okay, so what actually is in fact neurodiversity? Right. This is an umbrella term. This is not a diagnosis, it's a social construct. And there are lots of people who claim the terminology, but no one owns a word. All right. There's all kinds of people who will argue that they definitely invented the term neurodiversity, but no one owns a word. So the best bet that we can say is that the terminology arose during the 1990s. Back then, we used to have these things called internet forums. This is before we had like Facebooks and other social media, before we had MySpace even. I mean, that's a long time ago. And we had forums and we had email lists, and they were usually around a special interest. So if you had a particular band that you followed, or you had like a hobby that you were really interested in, or a football club, or, you know, you like Dungeons and Dragons or something. So, you know, people who had special interests in a particular area or a particular hobby would kind of hang out virtually on these things. And it was quite new at that time. And as time went on, it was discovered that there were quite a lot of autistic or ADHD people hanging out on these internet forums. And as a community, they felt that they didn't particularly like the pathologized language around their conditions. So they started to talk about their neurology, and they started to talk about their diversity. And together that became neurodiversity. And that's how we talk about different minds and brains. And then specifically, they started talking about neurodivergent. So this originally only referred to autism and ADHD, but it has been expanded to include all neurotypes with neurological difference that are not neurotypical. So let's give you some examples of those, right? As a general kind of overview, there are 3 main categories of neurodivergence. First, all hereditary conditions which cause a neurological difference. So in other words, a hereditary condition that means the mind or brain develops differently to a neurotypical peer. Secondly, all hereditary mental health conditions. So that's things like bipolar, schizophrenia, any other hereditary mental health condition. And then all acquired neurological differences, such as those caused by injury or illness. Okay, so if a child, for example, is otherwise neurotypical and then has a stroke as a small child, or encephalitis, meningitis, or some kind of brain injury through a car accident, etc., then they may have acquired neurodivergence. And that's one that is massively overlooked and can also happen to an adult. So somebody could be a neurotypical person and then have a stroke, unfortunately, in their early 30s or 40s, because that does happen, right? And then come back to work and they'll have different cognitive needs than they had previously. So that would be called acquired neurodivergence. And that is an area that we overlook somewhat. So thinking about the prevalence of different neurodivergent conditions. So this diagram here is about neurodiversity. So it talks about all different kinds of, all different kinds of neurology. So if you can see on that diagram, neurotypical is mentioned there. So neurotypical people are about 80% of the population, according to the ADHD Foundation, who are Europe's biggest neurodiversity charity. And then there are neurodivergent people. As I say, there's 20% of the population. I'm going to talk about some of the most common neurodivergent conditions, which are the ones that your neurodivergent colleague or yourself are most likely, statistically speaking, to have. So, for example, autism. According to the English government, autism has a prevalence of 1 in 38. They recently upped that from 1 in 100. I tend to go with a study that's rather old now. It's from 2015, which was done in South Korea. And there were over 1 million people screened for autism, and they came out with a prevalence of 1 in 28. So for me, that seems like the most accurate because it's the best research I've read so far. If that changes, however, I will change the statistics. But I'm going to go with about 1 in 30 to 28 to 30 people. ADHD Foundation says ADHD has a prevalence of around 1 in 20. Dyspraxia similarly has around 1 in 20 prevalence. And this is also commonly known as developmental coordination disorder, or DCD. And then you have dyslexia, which is pretty common. It's about 1 in 8 people. Dyscalculia is around 1 in 20. And then the most common, but often overlooked, neurodivergent condition is developmental language disorder or delay, otherwise known as DLD. And that is where somebody has a language delay that cannot be explained by another communication need, such as autism, Down syndrome, certain types of global delay. Okay, so that's where somebody has difficulty with their first language acquisition, which is usually delayed, but then develops along typical lines, but later. So they may not speak until they're 3 or 4, but it kind of develops like usual speech, but there will be a gap in their understanding because they didn't develop early speech. So those are the most common ones. There are others that are also quite common. So for example, Tourette's or tics disorder is also extremely common. But those are the main ones, the ones that you are most likely to hear of from you yourself or your colleague. Okay, so the other interesting and fun thing about neurodivergence is that it's very rare that somebody has just one neurodivergent condition. There is up to a 70% chance that there's a co-occurring condition. And that's why I really like this description, which is called the fruit salad approach. So this comes from Donna Williams. I didn't invent it, but it is one of my greatest hits. Yeah, so if you ever see me speak, then I'm going to talk about this quite a lot. So Donna Williams was an Australian singer-songwriter and autistic advocate, and she came up with this idea in order to describe her own neurodivergent need. Okay, so the bowl in this example is going to be the Katrina. And we know that there are different ingredients in my fruit salad. So, for example, I'm dyslexic. So if you wanted to help me at work, you might put accessibility tools on my laptop or on the system so it's easy for me to use, right? And that might help me with my reading and my spelling and possibly also some grammar or some syntax as well. So that'd be really great, and that would support me with aspects of my dyslexia. On the other hand, I'm also bipolar. So you might have like a access to work, or some kind of like HR package that you offer to your employees. And you might give me some sessions of counseling. Usually it's like 6 to 8 sessions or something like that, which would be really great because that would help me with my mental health and stress at work, etc. Okay. However, the therapy isn't going to necessarily help me with the spelling, right? And the accessibility tools aren't going to necessarily help me with my mental health. So you see, you'd need to do both in order to fully support me. And when you don't support both, we call that unmet needs. Okay. So if you yourself or your colleagues are struggling in some way, even if you have identified needs, there's sometimes a possibility that one of the needs has been overlooked, right? And that's pretty common, and one of the reasons why people are why burnout can be more prevalent amongst neurodivergent colleagues is because often needs are overlooked, or people will do things in a kind of piecemeal way, and they'll go, oh, well, you know, we know about this one, she's dyslexic, so we'll just give her like some accessibility tools and she'll be fine. But that's completely overlooking other needs. So if you or your colleague are struggling, it's worth considering that perhaps there are ingredients in their fruit salad that you haven't recognized yet. And here's the thing. You do not need to know the name of the fruit. You just need to know there's a fruit in there, okay? And it changes the flavor of the salad. And quite simply put, the way in which you identify the fruit is simply by writing a list of strengths and needs. Okay, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail now. Okay, so this is a case study idea here. In this scenario, you have a younger colleague who confides in you that she believes that she might be autistic, but has not sought a diagnosis as she thinks that no one will believe her. She is also worried about the stigma at work. What would you advise her? Right, so this is the question now. I believe that you can actually answer this in the chat. So hopefully I'll get some answers now. I will pause and see.
Hi, Cassandra. Oh, feedback.
Hello.
Hello. Sorry, I was just checking to see if we've got any comments. Nothing's come in so far. We'll give people a little time to have
I'll give it a minute. We're not in a rush. We've got plenty of time.
If she's maybe, but yeah. I like this stigma because that's these case studies, because it really makes people think about the approach.
It does, and just to keep you on your toes, if you ever watch this again, I probably would have changed it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Because I change them pretty much every time because stuff comes up, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done something like that, similar, where I ask them about, you know, what would you do, practical strategies, or, you know, in terms of the individual's well-being, you know, and what would you need as a manager? Oh, I think we might be getting a comment. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to bring this up on the screen. Okay, this is very fancy pants. I can do this.
I would encourage her to seek diagnosis if she thinks it would help her. I would also remind her that she isn't obligated to disclose the diagnosis to her employer if she's not comfortable to do so. That is an excellent answer. Thank you, Jamie. I think that's the important thing, isn't it? It is that, like, you don't have to disclose a diagnosis, even if you have one. You know, like, you're under absolutely no obligation to do so. What you choose to do with the information is entirely private, and no one can ever force you to share your medical records. So that's important. And then also as well, you know, the choice to get a diagnosis is also a really personal one, because the thing is about it is the Equalities Act talks about need. It doesn't talk about diagnosis. In some cases, there are situations that you need a diagnosis for, but actually, as an employer, the duty of care is to meet the need.
Yep. Yeah.
So if somebody says they need help with something and they identify as neurodivergent, then it is protected under the Equalities Act.
Yeah, and that's often overlooked, doesn't it? You know, I've heard of teachers where they've been asked to provide evidence, and it's not it's not necessary for them to do that. It assumes diagnosis, doesn't it? I think sometimes. Oh, we've got another. Should we share another? Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see. Right, here we go.
She doesn't need a diagnosis to make a start on discussing meeting her needs and what she has noticed. Hello, Kate. No, she doesn't. She doesn't need to do that. She just, she, if she's noticed herself, then that's enough, really. I mean, that's exactly it. It's a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act. I mean, one of the things that comes up quite a lot is shy neurodivergent people. So under the Equalities Act, there are certain conditions that are named, like autism, ADHD, and there are some conditions that are not named, like dyslexia, for example. But you can consider yourself to be, if you identify as being disabled, then you're disabled. And I always say that I am, personally. Not every neurodivergent teacher will, but I personally do. And the way I say it is, I am disabled by society. I am disabled by living in a neurotypical world. But it took me a really long time to come to that conclusion. And it was only really through talking to my union, which is the National Education Union, about this issue. They said, look, we haven't got enough disabled teachers actually identifying as disabled, which means it makes it much more difficult for us to kind of push the agenda, because we don't actually have accurate figures, because we think there's a lot more, but we think quite a lot of them are shy about it, particularly the neurodivergent people.
Yeah, and it's difficult because it's a catch-22, isn't it? Because they're not going to declare if they don't feel like they're in a safe environment to do so, and they're not going to get questions of competency. But yeah, this is all great.
Yeah,
yeah,
interesting one. Any more?
Jamie has just added, just to say that she thinks it's wonderful that you don't need a diagnosis.
Oh, right. Okay. So in America, you actually do you? That's interesting. Do you know what? Actually, I did a bit of work with a school in America the other day, and they were saying that the children absolutely had to have a diagnosis for support. But I think it's because we have quite a different kind of system in terms of health. Like if you actually diagnosed everyone on the NHS, there'd be no money left. We pay for it out of taxpayers' money, whereas I suppose like maybe with private insurances, insurance companies have a lot more money than the NHS does.
We've got a couple more. Sorry. Yeah, let's just get them up there. Here we go. This is from Lynn.
Oh, hello, Lynn.
Hello, Lynn.
It can be a huge pressure to come up with. People don't always know what is available to them and what would be helpful to them. It takes a conversation with management to try some things and review them. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. You know, to be honest, this is the thing, Lynn, and you're absolutely right. When I first kind of like had my big breakdown in 2017, if someone had asked me what I needed, I didn't know, because I've been high masking for so many years. Like literally well over, what was that like? What, I qualified in 1997. So that's 18 years. No, gosh. 98. Yeah. So, I'd been doing that for so many years. If you'd asked me then, I didn't know really. I just knew I needed to kind of get over my breakdown, first of all. Now I can identify those things, but really it was talking to Access to Work and the union that really helped me with that, because they go, sounds like this would help. And I'd go, oh yeah, that actually would help. So that's how I've kind of done it, really. I'd offer a listening ear. I don't feel equipped to offer specific advice, but happy to offer them a safe space. And that's the thing, Helen, it's really important to have that psychological safety. Like if somebody's going to share this with you, then they obviously trust you. So that's that good allyship just there, Helen. So thank you very much. Brilliant. Oh, it's really nice to get all these. More scenarios before we finish, so don't you worry. Shall I go on with the rest of the presentation now?
Please, that'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Right, so a little bit of a word about diagnosis and self-diagnosis. So we had quite a few points from that there. As far as I'm concerned, and most people are, self-diagnosis is entirely valid, right? So the vast majority of neurodivergent people will not have a diagnosis. And the reason for this is because diagnosis is a privilege. Now, I'm not saying that because it should be a privilege. I'm saying that because it actually is a privilege. So even if you lived in the UK and you have the National Health Service, the waiting lists, could be as long as your arm, frankly. I mean, for an adult, it can be anything between 3 and 7 years, depending on which part of the country you're in. Okay. So your other choice is to go private, and then you're looking at anything from £1,000 to £5,000. You might have to have a whip round with your family members, take out a credit card or a loan. It's not back of the sofa money. So getting a diagnosis can be very difficult. So the vast majority of neurodivergent people are not diagnosed. But the thing is, the law says you don't actually need to be in order to access support. So your employee or your colleague who's going through this diagnosis may not be diagnosed themselves. And that's an important point. Now, when it comes to self-ID, there's a lot of like very flippant remarks made about, oh, everyone's got ADHD these days, blah, blah. What, she's one TikTok video and now she's got ADHD. It's never like that. Okay. Speaking as somebody who went through that recently, and bear in mind, I'm a neurodiversity specialist. I have a master's in autism, which I got in 2014, right? I've known about these things for a long time. It's been a massive part of my career. It still took me 5 years to go forward for a diagnosis. And I read and watched and listened and talked to all kinds of people before I decided that I was actually going to be brave enough to go and see my psychiatrist. And the only reason I got to see a psychiatrist so quickly is because as a bipolar woman, I'm already locked into the services, right? And even then, I didn't get a full diagnosis because I cope so well. And she said, oh, there's no point in going forward for it because you can't have medication anyway, Katrina, because of your bipolar medication. So I have a piece of paper from a doctor that says traits of ADHD, but I do not have a full diagnosis. But the reason that I did it is because it's a really important part of my identity, right? So I have now validation from that doctor to say, sometimes if I have a mental illness, it's not mania and it's not depression, right? It's something else, which I now know to be neurodivergent burnout. And that would need to be treated in a different way because antipsychotic medication isn't going to help me in that situation. Just up my meds isn't going to work, right? I would need different support. And that's why I wanted written in my medical records. Okay. But everybody's journey is different. So that's to understand that if you are a neurodivergent teacher and you don't want to go forward for diagnosis, there's absolutely no need for you to do so. Self-ID is absolutely valid. There's a lot of people who call it me search when you do research into yourself. Okay. And, you know, before you actually go to the doctors, most people will have done extensive me search before they do that. Okay. So it's a very personal decision. If you are an ally, do not assume that your neurodivergent colleague has already gone for a diagnosis or even intends to do so, because it is a very personal decision. Okay, so a little word about language. Now, I tend to go with I tend to go with identity first language because that's what works for me, but it's not everybody's choice, okay? If you look at most of the surveys about neurodivergent people, like from the National Autistic Society, the ADHD Foundation, most people would prefer to put identity first. So they'll say a dyslexic person rather than a person with dyslexia. Okay, because that makes it sound like you can drop it and pick it up whenever you want to. So most people would say I am autistic rather than I am a person with autism, right? But it's not necessarily the case. So if you are an ally and you don't know, ask them, because the language that you use to talk about yourself or that you would like to be used to be talked about is a personal decision. So if you're not sure, ask that person. It's about that respectful curiosity. That's what being a good ally is about. So largely speaking, we avoid language like deficit, impairment, and disorder. I personally use disability when I talk about myself, but your colleague might not be, or you might not be comfortable with that. And that, again, is your decision because it's your identity here. I say identity quite a lot, by the way. And then other language. So I use the word condition personally. A lot of people don't like that because they think it's too medicalized. But for me, it just means it's lifelong. Okay. And that's what the definition of it is. And then the other thing is to remember that neurodiversity means everybody. So that includes neurotypical people. And neurodivergent is the 20% of us whose minds and brains are different. Okay. But again, language is a personal thing. And if you don't know, ask someone. And then the other interesting thing is intersectionality. So I talked already about diagnosis being a privilege. Traditionally, the diagnostic criteria have been very skewed towards males who are Caucasian, who are Eurocentric, who are Anglophone, who pretty much are middle class and also speak. So if you are anybody who is outside that range, it makes it more difficult for you to get a diagnosis. It makes it more difficult for you to get a diagnosis if you're from a lower socioeconomic background, because you can't get a private one because you couldn't afford it, right? There are certain ethnicities. Well, basically, neurodivergence is massively underrepresented in any group that isn't white, male, Anglophone. Okay, so there are huge issues around the diagnostic process, although that is being improved. But your neurodivergent colleague or yourself will probably have a number of different intersections. So intersections means aspects to your identity. Okay, so you could be from any religion, ethnicity, class, culture. You may have other disabilities. The physical disabilities that commonly co-occur with neurodivergence include hearing impairment and visual impairment. You could be any age, right? Because it's lifelong. That's why I say condition. But the other important intersection, which is worth pointing out here, is that if you are neurodivergent, there is a higher statistical likelihood of you having an LGBTQ identity. So, for example, in the typical population of England that was sort of measured the year before last, I think it was 2022, that there was a census, around 5% of the population had an LGBTQ identity. And of neurodivergent people, statistics seem to imply from study after study that around about 25% have an LGBTQ identity. So it's not a thing, it's just a thing, but that is an important intersection that exists. Okay. And, judging by people I know, it's probably about accurate. Okay. And then the other thing is as well, if you're autistic, then you are 3 to 6 times more likely to have a trans identity. There are various explanations that people say, but they are largely anthropological and have very little to do with biology or medical science. If you would like to ask me more questions about that, by all means, email me. Reflection. Okay, so story so far. What did you know previously about neurodivergence that you now see in a different light? I'd love to hear your answers in the chat.
Great. So over to the audience. Reflections. Well, I'm going to start it off.
Yeah, go ahead. I'd love to hear it, actually, Anna Marie.
I really enjoyed that. I liked it that you started it from the point of view of jump straight in terms of the allyship. So what can you do? And I think that's really important, because sometimes people don't know what to do. And I think that was a nice way of kind of introducing it. I love the fruit salad thing. So it's great, isn't it? Because I'm a very visual person anyway, so I'll remember that.
Well, the thing is that I didn't like it, because I don't know about you in school, but I was always described as being complex, and I didn't like that.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. So it's interesting about the intersections. So I think certainly talking about the privilege of diagnosis. So I come from a very working class background. So when I was a child, one reason I was diagnosed as an adult is, although there were signs, it was never picked up, and I was put in a remedial class because, and then on one hand they'd go, she's really bright, but, and then I'd end up, and actually it was a remedial teacher who said she shouldn't. That's the language they used at the time, in case anyone's wondering. That's what they used in the 80s. And it was the teacher there said she shouldn't be in this class, and I think that is definitely my intersection. One of the key things for me was probably being female, and obviously being of a social class, which it wasn't the obvious thing to go for diagnosis or even to pursue that. So I think that's a key thing, and that and your presentation has made me think about even more about those things. So that's great.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think like I was privileged insofar as both my parents are psychiatrists, so fairly middle class background, but also as well like they knew people. They knew people. I mean, it was only the dyslexia that was discovered, really.
Yeah.
But again, my head teacher's reaction when he got a great big envelope was to put me in the remedial class.
Yeah.
So at my school, they used to call them the REMs.
Right.
So that wasn't very nice.
No.
Really. And
no.
we did loads of colouring in and cutting and sticking and stuff. And like they taught me how to colour in inside the lines.
I can't colour in inside the lines, so that way I've never been able to do, which I'm very proud of. I definitely colour outside the lines.
Well, yeah, isn't it really? But yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Okay, have we got any other comments from?
We haven't. Let me just see. Is this refreshing? Oh, have we got something coming through? Any comments on reflections over the session? I think we're going to get many more as this is watched
Okay,
later on.
We'll go forward so we don't run out of time. But anyone else, if we get a minute, then we'll pop them in the end.
Yeah, no worries. Right, I'll take myself back out.
Right, so why employ neurodivergent staff if you are an ally? The reason for this is because this model can be easily applied to school, and this comes from Talent Lift. And this diagram is made up from data that was taken from a study by Harvard University. It's talking about diversity as a whole. But neurodiversity in the workplace has been proven to improve problem solving and also motivation within staff. It can increase profits, particularly in business. It can increase productivity. It can increase problem solving ability. And there are loads and loads of other benefits there. So this is a really great diagram. If you want to know more about this, if you look up Harvard University studies on diversity, they are absolutely fascinating. So if you'd like a little rabbit hole to go down, that is definitely a really good website. They've done some amazing work on diversity in the workplace. So the next issue that we have for neurodivergent teachers, as I said previously, was underemployment. So this doesn't mean that neurodivergent teachers aren't working in education. They quite clearly are, because that's why people are here today. The problem is that a lot of them are underemployed. So by underemployed, there are three different branches to this. Firstly, they may not be working as many hours as they want to. Secondly, they might not have taken a promotion that they want to. Or thirdly, they could be in a situation of burnout where they're not actually even able to access work, right? So if we actually want to progress with employment and the recruit and, do anything about the recruitment and retention crisis that's out there, we've got 20% of people who are neurodivergent, some of whom would really like a job in teaching. So what can we do in order to remove the barriers and make them have some progress in terms of this underemployment? So again, the key factors are knowing your colleague and remembering to focus on these three areas. So first of all, what do they like doing? Secondly, what are they good at? And thirdly, how can you help them to get job satisfaction? Now, over recent months, and this is relatively recent, so these changes came in April. Here's a challenge for you. On your first day of work, you're allowed to ask for flexible working. Now, it used to be that you had to wait for 3 months, but now you can request it actually on the first day that you sign up to a contract, right? The chances of that happening in education are slim. There are some education establishments, such as private schools and multi-academy trusts in England, who are making a difference in this area. I've heard of some really amazing innovative ideas, particularly in Australia. So if there are any of our Australian colleagues listening or watching this today, then I would love to hear more about what's going on. I've had a few ideas from people in my group, but there are certainly things that can be done. So this idea of like moving towards a 4-day week, for example. So if you had your work collapsed into 4 days so that you could then take Friday off to, do a yoga class or, relax basically, or do some gardening or something else that was useful and mindful to you, then that might be good, because that, you know, you can work long hours as a teacher. There's no reason why you couldn't do that, actually. I mean, there's lots of schools that are already doing that. There are some schools that are allowing a late start or an early finish on certain days. There's some really great innovative ideas. And I think, honestly, if we're going to do anything about this recruitment and retention crisis that's going on, then we really need to think about other ways to allow our neurodivergent colleagues to have the job satisfaction, but also accommodate our needs. Okay. And to be honest, that should be extended to everyone, not just the neurodivergent colleagues. So when I say employee accommodations, in England and Britain as a whole, I've talked quite a lot about protected characteristics. There are 9 protected characteristics. So under the law, allowances need to be made, reasonable adjustments need to be made on the basis of these characteristics. And as I said, neurodivergence would come under disability, and there are some neurodivergent conditions which are named. But however, an employee does not need to identify as disabled in order to access things like access to work. Okay, I'm going to skip that one. Right, so we have another case study here. And this is the final one before we finish. Right, you recognize traits of neurodivergence, such as sensory processing issues, executive functioning differences, social communication differences in a colleague. You believe they may be high masking. You are concerned about burnout. What steps would you take to support them? So just to clarify, high masking means doing such a good job at pretending to be neurotypical that only the trained eye would be able to notice.
That's great. Thank you. I think I pretty much high masked my whole entire life. And I think there's something unique about teaching as well, in the fact that, I don't know about you, and I'm sure many on this who are listening or going to listen later, is that everyone works at such high intensity. And for a lot of the time, you're quite autonomous in the fact that, you know, you might be working in your classroom, or you might be you've got your own lessons, and it's very difficult to always pick that up. But yeah, let's see what we've got coming through. So yeah, how would you support? And I love that, all that idea about, the work into the strength based, for the whole team. It benefits everyone. I used to say that, why does every teacher need to go to that staff meeting? Could you not record it? That would give them back that time. Simple things like that. I think
just things like, I mean, like, some people love a spreadsheet, so why not get them to do the data part? And other people like parents, so why not get them to do, the talk on the annual talk on a school trip or something? I mean, let people from a department, or or a year group or a key stage play to their strengths. Why not?
Yeah. And then in that way, you really would be neuro-inclusive. So what you're doing is you're appreciating that everyone in the workplace, like you just said, that will benefit everyone if we had that approach, not just our neurodivergent colleagues. But yeah, let's see if we've got anything else coming through. Nothing at this stage.
Okay.
Oh, here we go, Lynn. Love it.
Yeah, go on, Lynn.
Go on, Lynn.
Yay, Lynn. I would explain what masking was and ask them if that resonates with them. That's a really good point, actually. Do you know what, Lynn? That's a really good point, because they might not know it at all. Because I didn't know. I didn't know I was masking till I had a breakdown, really. They may not realize they are masking, often bogged down with multiple tasks to do, and it could have loved some help to plan or manage paperwork within class. It was the additional stuff, often struggled with and blamed myself instead of understanding masking. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened to me, really, is that I thought I was lacking, really. And what I wasn't lacking, I was masking. And that's what led to the burnout in the first place, really, is that you do end up blaming yourself because you think that you're less somehow, but actually You're not. And it is an unreasonable amount of work that we're expected to do as teachers. It's unreasonable. You just wouldn't get it wouldn't get it in other jobs.
No. And also, to add to that, the level of surveillance over teachers, that's a key thing as well, I think, in terms of adding to the pressure. And Kate's made a good point in terms of that high mask, they might potentially be quite defensive, because you feel like your professional integrity, and also we've got internal ableism, so all of those factors.
Definitely internalized. All right, okay, so I'm just going to finish up my last couple of slides because I've got 2 whole minutes.
Great.
I can do this. Right, so now going forward, about it being inclusive manager, right? If you are a manager or you are a colleague of somebody who's neurodivergent, you need to first of all know your employee or colleague, know their needs, and work in co-production. You can't do things to people, you need to do things with people, and that is my mantra. Okay, and finally, final thoughts: allowing your neurodivergent colleague to be their authentic selves and adds to the diversity of your organization. This is kintsugi, which is the Japanese art form where artists use gold paint to fix broken pieces of crockery. And this represents acceptance. And I think you'll agree it's rather beautiful. So I'm just going to leave you with a quote from a TikToker who I've never been able to find again, but I thought this was awesome, so I still quote him. So he's a neurodivergent, ADHD carpenter. And he said, "Did you think it was who invented fire? It wasn't no neurotypical kid banging 2 sticks together. It was the kid with ADHD." So we need these different kinds of minds and brains in society. Our neurodivergent children can't be what they can't see, and we can set a really amazing example. So it's definitely something to be celebrated. Here are a list of my references, which you are very welcome to screenshot if you would like more information. We've had quite a lot of questions and I've only got 1 minute left, but I am highly contactable and these are my contact details. So if you'd like any more information, if you are interested in joining the Neurodivergent Teachers Network on Facebook, then by all means, please do join it. I am available on all social media platforms apart from Twitter because it's yucky, as @neuroteachers, and my email address is katrina@neuroteachers.com and my website is neuroteachers.com. And also you can find neurodiversity in education on LinkedIn. Are we on any other platforms?
LinkedIn, Facebook, we're on as well.
LinkedIn and Facebook, yes. So please join us there. And also there's going to be other really fabulous, wonderful people who are going to be speaking later this week, including Lynn, who's amazing and fantastic. And I'm doing some other work with her about neurodivergent teachers, but watch this space.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katerina. That was brilliant. And there's lots to kind of take away from the neurodivergent teacher, but also from, I think if someone from head of teacher learning or teacher professional development or SLT was watching this, they would have some kind of really useful takeaways. So that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you, and a huge thank you to the audience as well for taking part. It's always great to have a bit of interaction. So a big clap to you, Katrina. I love that. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. And please do stay tuned. And all the sessions are pre-recorded apart from the support group for neurodivergence for neurodivergent teachers on Thursday, and the knowledge what's it called? So the sharing knowledge, that I can't think of the term now, that Simon is setting up. But everything's on our website, so please do have a look. And thank you for joining us, and thank you, Katerina. I'm going to stop the streaming now.
Thank you.